Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 7th, 2025 meeting of the Policy Subcommittee of the Brookline School Committee. We have two items on our docket today. One is a review of the Student Civil Rights Policy, and the second is a review of a possible camera policy as part of a safe schools policy. Is that right? Not part of the safe schools policy, a school security policy. But let's start with a approval of the minutes for, sorry, I'm bringing up the agenda
March 3rd.
from March 3rd. Do I have a motion for that?
I move that they be accepted.
Anybody want to second that?
No second.
Andy, your vote?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Okay. Hang on one second. Okay, so the main item for tonight is a discussion of a student civil rights policy, which is a proposed revision to, or proposed replacement really for J6 and J7. This is the second discussion of that policy. And we have with us Becky Schuster and Dr. Karen Schmuckler. Is it Dr. Becky Schuster?
It is not.
Sorry, didn't mean to dress you down there. So we have the two of you here to review the changes made since the last version of that policy draft. So I turn it over to you two.
Right. So I'm just going to delighted to be here and to be able to introduce Becky. As many of you know, Becky has worked with the team here for a number of months, drafting the policy and taking in community edits. It went, to a number of people after the January meeting. And so really Becky is here to sort of walk us through where we are in terms of the policy and the final draft, and obviously still a process in terms of additional feedback, comment, and edits as we move this forward in terms of having an established coherent civil rights policy for students in the public schools. So thank you, Becky.
Thank you, and it's been a pleasure to work with Karen since she came to play the interim role with the district, as well as continuing to work with Claire and Matt on the development of policy and other related forms and protocols. Betsy, could I ask you to share the slides, please?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So first, I'm going to just make a very brief presentation. Mostly I'm here to hear any questions you have, any concerns you have, sounds like there's some additional changes. You can scroll down to the objectives. So my understanding is I'll be sharing with you some of the process we've gone through since I last met with you on January 27th. Answer any questions you have. I think it's fantastic for us to incorporate additional feedback in live time, and I've just shared the Google Doc with Steve. And my understanding is that it is possible that we will the subcommittee will take a vote today. You can go to the next slide, Betsy.
That should be 25, by the way, Becky, in the first one.
Oops. Apologies for that.
Yeah, I saw it earlier today. No problem.
Thank you for catching that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
So since the January 27, 2025 meeting, we have created the second draft policy. That is the one we'll be looking at today. And there have been three main sources of input into that second draft. The first one is your input from the January 27th meeting. And I would say the most significant change we made as a result of that was around the annual report that you have requested. So that is now in the text.
Thank you for making that a separate section too. I think that was a nice choice.
Okay, great. Good. I'm glad you appreciated that. And second, we also had a period of public comment for parents and caregivers. All Brookline Public School of Brookline parents and caregivers received a notification of the opportunity to review the student civil rights policy as well as the bullying plan. And we got some very thoughtful feedback that was incorporated into the student civil rights policy.
How were they, Becky, how were they, just for in terms of process, how were the parents and caregivers notified?
Letters went out from the superintendent to all parents and caregivers by email.
Thank you.
I believe there was also a notification in the superintendent's newsletter in addition to a direct email to parents. And
Great.
we received quite a few very thoughtful comments, a number of which were incorporated into the draft you're looking at now. And lastly, after incorporating both sets of input from you and from parents, we then brought the draft policy to outside counsel, Jennifer King, who I imagine many of you have worked with before, and she made a few additional comments that were also incorporated. Similarly, we went through a feedback process on the community incident reporting form, the protocols for both student civil rights and bullying investigations, the investigation documentation form that's for use by school administrators when they have completed their investigation, and the bullying prevention plan. We're only here today to discuss the student civil rights policy, although all of these are related and have now been put into second draft form. And I believe
Were
there's
the forms aren't part of the packet though?
No.
correct. My understanding is that the subcommittee and the school committee only review in a formal way the policy itself.
That's right.
Okay. I was looking for them. I didn't see them. So. Thank you.
You're very welcome. So that's just framing the conversation. And now I really am just here to answer your questions, your concerns. And Steve, you let me know if you want me to be making edits live, and we could have you share your screen as we do, you know, however you'd like to work this. I turn it over to you.
Thank you. I think I'll make edits as necessary. But first, let me get some feedback from the committee on the current version of the policy. Welcome, Carolyn. Go ahead, Carolyn.
So I do have feedback and thoughts I want to share, but I think I emailed about this earlier. I would like if you can help me understand again why this, how many pages is this? 18-page policy is being proposed to replace the existing. And the word compliance has been used, but I would like you to point to what is being promulgated here by this.
I'll do the best I can to respond to that, because it could be a very lengthy answer to that excellent question, but I'll try to summarize. The existing policies were lacking some essential features. For example, the list of protected categories was not up to date. For example,
so up to date per what is it
the
that
law.
What law?
Sure. So the primary student civil rights laws are Title VI and Title IX, that are federal laws. And those laws have evolved over time, both in terms of formal revision of the law and also implementation of the law through regulations. So one goal of the update was to make sure that it was compliant with the most recent versions of the law and the regulations, as well as what's been litigated in court through case law.
And
so
so this is meant to allow PSB to what in that respect?
Great question. So when PSB investigates an incident, we want to make sure that we're applying best practices and that the district is not vulnerable to a lawsuit stating that we were not compliant with expectations that exist under Title VI and Title IX, depending on the nature of the incident. So there's really two levels. I always see compliance as the floor. Of course, we want the district to be following the law, and while there may be a parent or a staff member that is not pleased with the implementation by the district, we want to be as protective of the district as possible in ensuring compliance with the law and regulations. But ultimately, it is always my hope that we go above and beyond the law to ensure that we are affirmatively seeking to create a welcoming environment for all students.
Okay, so, and sorry, just bear with me here.
No problem. These are
In the
important
beginning
questions.
of that last part, you said, when PSB investigates an incident, we want to make sure we are,
Compliant with the law and regulations regarding student civil rights.
So
And
can I jump in?
go for it.
Karen? So I would think that sections 4, 5, 6, and 7 are relevant here because those sections relate specifically to reporting and investigating and addressing the findings of investigations. So I guess my follow-up, if you don't mind, Carolyn, my follow-up question is, are those the sections that are relevant to bringing us into greater compliance with those with Title 6 and 9, or are there sections outside of investigations that that also improve our compliance?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in almost every section of this policy, there are pieces that are relevant to compliance. So I'll give an example. The definition of sexual violence is
Great.
very important to ensure our compliance, so that every school administrator who responds to an incident of sexual misconduct is clear, for example, whether they are required to report it to the Department of Children and Families and file a 51A. So I would really say that almost every section of this policy is either partly or wholly related to compliance with state and federal law.
so are you saying, sorry, Stephen, because I'm
Go
going to
ahead.
go back because I'm still trying to just understand this at baseline. Are you saying, Becky, that the primary purpose of this is to aid investigations by providing a lot of information about reporting?
I would say it's
Because what I find in reading this is an almost overwhelming amount of information that is that reads as controlling behavior and defining behavior, frankly, in a nearly oppressive way.
Is there an example that you want to point to, Carolyn, that can help us?
There's
Or
so many. Students sometimes experience
what
microaggression.
page? What page? Oh,
Four.
that's in page 2, I think, right?
4.
4.
Mistaking one student for another because they share the same racial identity. Complimenting a student for having a skill that is counter to a stereotype regarding their gender or ethnicity. Assuming a student observes a particular religious holiday. Asking a student about their disability without their consent or the consent of their parent caregiver. So those are prohibited behaviors.
Well, they're
No,
listed there as
No.
examples of things that don't rise to levels of violations of the policy. So
I understand that.
Yeah, so those are actually not prohibited.
When
Those
microaggressions are reported, there is an intervention associated with reports of all of those things that I just listed. So it's there. So to say, oh, it's meaningless, but it's there in writing, and there's a
Yeah.
definition of microaggressions,
I'll
and
share
there's
with
an
you.
intervention associated with said microaggressions.
Yeah, so the point of this section is actually to make it clear that these types of behaviors are human mistakes that we all make pretty much every day with one another, because we are bringing together people from a very wide variety of backgrounds and experiences and preferences. I know that something I had to learn for myself, for example, in interacting with blind people, is that some blind people want in a meeting for everyone to always state their name when they speak so they can recognize who's speaking. Other blind people find that very insulting and say, hey, I've been blind my whole life. I can make those distinctions. And if I don't recognize a voice, I'll tell you. So we all do things every day that one person may find harmful and another person may not. But if we do offend someone, there's the option available to say, hey, that's actually not the most thoughtful question to ask somebody, and here's why, or here's why that particular blind person would prefer us to handle it differently. So coaching, typically is a short conversation, and occasionally there might be something more than that, such as a short restorative conversation where there might be an apology made. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you prefer me to say my name before I speak. So this is really guidance so that we don't have those sort of everyday kind of human errors being escalated as if they would violate the policy. And we're trying to give clear examples of things that aren't ideal, but would not result in an investigation or discipline of any kind.
Except there are 3, 4, 5, 6 interventions listed. So I would respectfully suggest that by codifying everyday human behavior and interactions among adults and
We
children.
can change it, Carolyn. If you want to suggest a change to it, this is our power. So if you don't like that part of the policy, please feel free to suggest a change.
Well, we've gotten into the weeds here because I was asked to give an example of what's concerning me and perplexing me about the purpose of this entire endeavor, and my response to it as I find the whole thing to be just incredibly heavy-handed and draconian and perplexing. So I'm at baseline just trying to understand what is meant to be achieved here.
Let's go to Jesse and then come back to
fine.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Hi, so my question, Becky, is there's a list on the bottom of page 2 where it states that all PBS publications for everybody and the general public has to contain a non-discrimination notice. That's great. And the question I have is the list shown there, race, color, age, criminal record, disability, etc., is not the same and in different order than all the other places in the document where it lists between 14 and 16 categories of potential areas in which individuals could violate the policy. And my question is, why aren't we being consistent from paragraph 1 on page 1? We aim to eliminate all forms of bias, including discrimination based on. It's not the same list exactly as it is in the notice, and then it's mentioned again, and I think at least 2 other places. I may be wrong. There's only 1 other place, but I don't understand. Yeah, it's in the notice on the bottom of 2, and then it's smack right again the next paragraph in section 2, first paragraph. It lists it again and adds homelessness at the end. So my question really is, I mean, these all are great categories. I'm not. Please don't misconstrue that I'm saying any of these categories shouldn't be there. What I'm saying is that, I mean, I'm sure they're all the ones covered by the law. But why are they different? Why aren't we just using?
It's a great question and very good catch. And there is a very specific answer. At the bottom of page 2, the list also includes categories that our employees have that protection, as well as the protection students have, because this is designed to be an umbrella statement that includes laws protecting employees as well as laws protecting students. So a perfect example is criminal records. That is a state statute that protects individuals who are applying to work in Massachusetts workplaces from discrimination based on their criminal record during early stages of hiring. So that is completely irrelevant to students, but we were trying to design a statement that would incorporate, so we wouldn't have to have a separate student civil rights non-commitment and
Right.
employee civil rights. We put them together. Another good example would be military or veteran status. These are protections, again, that employees have, but that are not relevant to students. On the other hand, homelessness is an example of a protection students have, but employees don't. So a student is protected from and has very specific rights if they are unhoused. The most important right being if a Brookline student were to become unhoused and they are temporarily crashing on Auntie's couch the next town over, the town has an obligation to continue to transport them to their Brookline school.
Sure.
So that is, and that would not be the case, of course, for an employee. There'd be no obligation to pick them up at their new location to bring them to work, right? So this
okay, I
statement
get
is
the
comprehensive.
I get that one being for employees. And what about the paragraph on page 1, first paragraph, and then at section 2, first paragraph? That's defining bias-based. Number 2 is defining bias-based conduct towards students. So it would not
Right.
affect employees. And that's still not the same list in the way it's presented as the one in first paragraph.
So the one, wait, are you seeing, so the first paragraph?
I mean, if you look at the,
Go ahead.
You're talking about page 3 now.
yeah, the top of page 3 goes from race through homelessness, first in
Yes.
lines. And the one on page 1 goes from race through hairstyle. Homelessness is left somewhere in the middle. I'm just saying, can we just be consistent if they're this
Sure,
same application?
absolutely, be happy to fix that.
Okay.
And
I
Steve,
would
I'm sure
support
that's
that.
something you could do, yeah.
I would support that. So the suggestion here is where possible to standardize uh the categories of forms of bias and bigotry.
In the list, actually, the
Yeah.
list is
The
same
sequencing.
sequential list.
Yeah,
So anyone
The
else reading it
sequencing.
doesn't have to go looking for it. They can expect it to be, you know,
right.
something will be sex, gender will be the 4th position, whatever it is. I don't want to we don't have to like overkill this. I'm just thinking that there's no reason for it to be not in the same sequence in the
I
2
agree.
areas where it's student related. That's all I'm saying.
I agree.
Okay.
Andy, Carolyn, any objections to that? Okay. Jesse, did you have a further question?
No,
Okay.
not at this time.
Andy, do you have any questions or concerns about the policy?
No, but to respond to Carolyn, I guess I would not want that list of microaggressions to go away. I think it's important to have it in there as examples of things that we don't want to escalate, that don't have to trigger an investigation, that don't have to trigger discipline. If it seems heavy-handed, I wonder whether we might try to fix that by changing the word will to may in the sentence following the bullet points. So we're not requiring everybody to engage in those interventions, but the point is that those are things you might want to consider when microaggressions get reported.
Yeah, if I can offer my thoughts on that too, I just want to say that overall, I really am grateful for how much more robust this revision is than our previous policy. I think it better represents the value, our core values, and it also is more needed in our current political climate. So I appreciate the breadth and rigor in this policy. That
I
said,
have oh, sorry, go ahead.
that said, Carolyn, if there are places where you feel that it's overbroad or that you think it overreaches, I think let's go through it and let's find places where you think
I'd be happy to do
we should make
that.
those
I have a
changes.
general question in that respect too. So, maybe I'm just dumb. I'm still not seeing the whatever. I don't think I'm going to fully understand this. Last year, I think, before I was on school committee, there was work done on a proposal for a hate speech prevention policy. And that ended up dead on arrival because the ACLU stepped in and said that it would chill speech, I believe. And
I don't think
that
that's
I
why.
don't think that's why it died.
Okay, so I don't know why it died, but the ACLU stepped in and said that it would chill speech. This policy is far more prescriptive in terms of speech and behavior. So I'm confused about why the same concerns are not coming up in terms of being overly prescriptive when this goes to places above and beyond where the hate speech proposal went. So
You mean like in
anybody
examples of
explain that?
bias-based behavior? Like
Sorry?
do you mean like, for example, in the examples of bias-based behavior being being constraining on free speech?
I mean that the whole thing is extremely detailed, extremely prescriptive. Um,
I guess I feel like
so
the
I'm
example,
just interested in the difference in response to this and that, particularly considering the ACLU's letter to the school committee at that time.
I mean, for the ACLU's letter, I don't think that's what ended our efforts around the hate speech
That's
prevention.
fine,
I
but it was, I mean, it was certainly acknowledged and discussed at the time as like the ACLU said, this is too chilling, too prescriptive, too much. And this goes
well, first, I think there were
to all new places.
to, to my mind that we didn't move that forward because there was a lack of consensus around how to define hate speech, how to define the problem we were attempting to solve, and how to generate a solution that would solve more problems than it would generate. So that difficulty seemed to me why it didn't advance. Secondly, I think a lot of policies have examples that, and without examples, I think this policy would lack precision. So I guess I just keep wanting to make concrete changes. I hear you that you feel that there's like an orientation to this policy, Carolyn, that feels wrong to you. I don't feel that way, so that's why I guess I want to go to
Sure.
language that feels objectionable to you, because I feel totally willing to work on language to make it more acceptable so it could build a consensus here. But I guess I don't know how to address the difference that we have around the general orientation because I like it. I like that breadth and robustness. I
And
feel
I
like
also just generally speaking find as a current parent in the school system, and I've been in the school system for a while now, it's all there's just also a certain irony or um lack of consistency between the strenuousness and prescriptiveness and punitiveness of this policy and actual discipline in the schools, which has sort of become less and less. I mean, I think you even took the word discipline out of PSB policy. So there's just a sort of, I can't reconcile, it's difficult for me to reconcile the, I guess, strenuousness or punitiveness. Those are the words that of of the language here, and then the reality of, you know, things that happen in schools and the lack of response, lack of discipline,
right.
disciplinary measures is just perplexing. And that's so that is part of why um I react to this. Not only the content itself, but the content and looking at it and being like, and meanwhile, you know, this happens, this happens, this happens, and nobody will even use the word discipline. We just have happy circles. So um
I get it.
that's my observation as somebody who lives the schools.
Can I just make a quick response, Jesse, and then I'll I'll go to you.
Of
I
course.
guess I would just say, Carolyn, that I don't think we should look at this as exclusive of other policies. Like we still do need to review the discipline policy. I agree with you that to look at this and to not also be considering how do we respond to recent incidents at schools feels tilted. But I think we should do both. I just want to take this policy, I want to get this policy right also. I
Understood.
but I totally get what you're saying that but to just focus on this policy when there are incidents happening that this policy seems disconnected from, I get what you're talking about. Like there have been incidents at schools lately that this policy is pulling in the other direction from. But I think we should be addressing both. I just want to make sure that this policy is strong at the same time. Does that make sense,
That makes sense.
Jesse?
Different topic. In Becky, on section 12 at the bottom of page 16. The section on annual reporting was removed from that very long monster paragraph where it used to be in the last time we went over this, if you recall.
Wait, I'm sorry. Say that again, Jesse.
Section 12, which begins
Yeah.
at the bottom of page 16. As you said, Stephen, and I agree wholeheartedly, the placement of this in its own section makes it much easier to identify and also clearer. However, I have the following questions about this. When I asked for the data after our last meeting, it took a long time. And when I got the data, it was only a two column charts. And in looking at the paucity of the data in the column charts, it was evident to me that there was no way that that could be all the data. It didn't, there were things I'd asked for, like what day did it come in, and who reported it, meaning a teacher or a student or a parent, so not identifiable, Becky, right? And then how long did it take from along the timeline from the when the incident was actually occurred and when the school was notified, someone in the school, and then after that, exactly each of the steps in the timeline are important, especially given what we have in this policy earlier in the sections here about what the requirements seem to be, like absolute requirements about you must do this within a day, same day, or at the worst next day, and then 10 days, and then 30 days, those kinds of things. It seems to me that the section 12 just does not provide enough information to support quantitative reporting that someone will have to be held accountable to do. To read that we'll prepare an annual report regarding the number and nature of reports means incidents, I think. The report is actually, Stephen, there actually number of reports, there is a ambiguous word giving we'll prepare an annual report in the same sentence. We should probably say the penultimate word on page 16 should probably just say nature of incidents.
The reason it shouldn't say incidents is some things that
event
reported or not didn't occur.
Right, but whatever, I'm saying the word report, an annual report,
Incident
and the nature of
reports.
report is a little confusing.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
But my bigger issue with this, or I'll put a challenge out there to us as a group, is to say
Right.
an annual report regarding the number and nature of reports is really just like a column chart that has frequency at the bottom and frequency on the y-axis and some set of categories. I mean, the 16 categories of that Becky that we showed earlier, like race, age, pregnancy, homelessness, some examples, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether the finding was made in each case, whether a finding was made, that wasn't in the data that we got. Any trends weren't in the data. Seems to me like we should be a little more declarative here about what we're really looking for. Almost like what Carolyn pointed out about examples of microaggressions. Why couldn't we add in 12 the basic kinds of data that you anticipate getting when a declaration by someone, I'll stay away from report, when a declaration is made by someone of having experienced something, there are certain pieces of that I think we know should be easily available. That's, when it happened, how long it took to do what, did it die or not die, what was the final end, what was the category, what should those categories be? I would suggest we do a little more thinking about the quantitative side of the annual reporting. If it was religion, maybe we break that down. Was it anti-Islam? Was it anti-Semitic? Whatever it might be. I mean, I think that there are
Yeah.
particular things we would notice, especially if we're going to get trends in the data. It really isn't very helpful if we know it's like, I don't know, the category that we use in there of religion, and then just see 63. We don't usually know which protected group, for example, might have been most affected by
Yeah.
religious persecution or discrimination in the school.
Becky, what are your thoughts on?
Yes. Yeah, so I have also created a model template for the annual report that I've shared with Karen and Lisa, Matt, and Claire, and certainly could share with this committee as well. There's a big challenge with this type of reporting, and that is students' privacy rights. The challenge becomes when the number of incidents is relatively small. It's quite easy to figure out and match a report to an incident we've heard about personally or even sometimes in the press. So, for example, if we were to hear that X school had this many incidents, and one of them was an incident involving Islamophobia, and there was or was not a finding, now we are sharing with the public something that could have been disciplinary in nature, and it's perhaps very widely known what student engaged in that conduct. So it gets very, very tricky in terms of the legal rights of the students. So that's why we kept this relatively vague, because yes, of course, the school committee and the public has the right to ask follow-up questions about the data and to have that data shared to the extent possible. But it's very difficult to require in the policy a certain kind of level of detail when often it's impossible to communicate with that level of detail without violating the FERPA, federal, what does that stand for?
Becky, is it possible, do you think, to either propose in an appendix a template for this that that is sufficiently conservative as to not reveal that wouldn't run afoul of student privacy, that could still provide a level of detail to the school committee, or to provide some language that would, I think Jesse's challenge is a good one, to commit to a level of detail that would give the school committee and the public some visibility into incidents in the district. Is there some language that you can?
It's a tough balance, but it could certainly be tried. Yeah.
Well, Becky, let me frame it a little differently, okay? Because I see this in my continued frustration of being able to get data and get it on time, which doesn't happen. It's in my experience the last 10 months is that it's or 11 months now, is that it's a very arduous process, generally speaking, to get to the quantitative information. So let's just say, to follow your point a little further, and again, I'm just picking out of the 16, let's say that there were 10 high-profile situations of discrimination against homeless children in the Brookline public schools. And Brookline.News did 3 articles over a year that showed 3 students, 3 students, and 4 students. So there were 10 situations in which each time it was so egregious that it made it to a newspaper, okay? And then the annual report that we get, a superintendent and the school committee gets, somehow denatures that information so that it just shows that there were some, but it doesn't show that there were 10. Well, I mean, honestly, if the public already knows that there's 10, why shouldn't the report say that there are 10? I mean, what are we hiding? And it was like, and if there's only 1, well, the newspaper probably, they like bad news, so they probably won't say, hey, you guys got so much better the next year. You only had 1 situation with discrimination against homeless kids. It probably won't make it to the newspaper. And if the superintendent and the school committee get a report that say homelessness was, there was a discrimination issue with it, that was 1. What I don't get it. I'm not clear yet on where the privacy issue starts to be. Is it because people know which kids are homeless temporarily? Is it because we're worried people are going to drill into it? I mean, there's a
So
sense in
if
which the data gets so simplified that it really, the annual report
I
is sort of
understand.
meaningless.
Yeah, I understand. There is a constant tension between the public's very legitimate interest in knowing what those trends are and the privacy of the students. So, for example, if there were 10 incidents district-wide regarding homelessness, and we could say that in those 10 incidents, 2 were eventually deemed microaggressions, 2, there was insufficient evidence that anything occurred, and the remaining 6, there was a finding of a policy violation. That type of data is absolutely legitimate to share. But if it were to say, at the Driscoll School, there was an incident involving a second grader who's homeless, and it resulted in the discipline of a third grader for making inappropriate comments regarding that student's homelessness, now we're getting to a level of detail that a lot of people are going to go, that's my neighbor, you know, whatever. They're going to
So
recognize the
I'm going to
fact
just
pattern.
jump in for a second. And
Sure.
we're maybe getting a little off track, but again, for me, there's just an interesting sort of tension here between what's being talked about and what happens in reality, because all the time there are reports, communication goes out from schools to the community, sometimes the whole community, sometimes certain grades, saying this thing happened and this is a bad thing, and everybody knows who it is. So if someone here is saying that that's not a good thing, then maybe there needs to be some education about communication that goes out, because that seems to be part of the process. There's doesn't ever seem to be discipline, but there's always an email, and everybody knows who
Now, I am in
involved.
total favor, and I've certainly advised the district during my time as a consultant to the district, that in general, the more impact an incident has, the more important those communications are, and that I'm absolutely in favor of that type of communication. My concern here is in formal reports of data at the end of each year, that a balance be struck between the very important communication of trends and making sure that we protect our young people.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm not sure I was that I heard the beginning of what you said. You do favor those kinds of communications going on.
Absolutely.
Okay, so how is that consistent with the very same concern that you are saying you have about protecting
Yeah,
the identity or privacy of our young people?
right. So in
I'll
terms,
also ask at the same time, I'm interested to hear, like, we just had this mini conversation about microaggressions, and then you said, like, oh, there could be an investigation where something is determined to have only been a microaggression. So again, it's pretty clear that this notion of microaggression is being heavily formalized here.
no, the intent is actually the opposite. It's just that what tends to, in terms of the microaggression piece, I think a good metaphor is the concept of with fires, the 1 alarm fire versus 2 alarm versus 3 alarm. When something happens to my child, I'll be honest, my gut is it's like 10 alarm every time, because I am her mom and I want to protect her. And even a minor thing that hurts her feelings, like I want action, okay? But I have to, as a professional in this world of civil rights for students, I have to step back from that and analyze the seriousness of what occurred. So yes, the district has an obligation when something is reported that could be a policy violation. We have to find out what happened. And if it's a 0 alarm fire, which is a microaggression, then maybe we're going to have a quick conversation and say, by the way, that's not the best language to use. It turns out that it hurt your friend's feelings, your classmates' feelings, and let's not use that word again. And we're done. Versus a 1 alarm fire, which might require something more action than that, up to something very serious that could result in disciplinary action under the code of conduct. So, and also could involve police even, depending on the seriousness. There may be an obligation to report to the Department of Children and Families or to the Brookline Police Department. So there's a big range of seriousness, and the policy is aimed to guide school administrators to make those very important distinctions from something that's a quick educational conversation to something that actually we are obligated to report to law enforcement. In terms of, yeah, go ahead.
So I want to actually wrap this conversation up because we have to move on to the next policy under consideration. I want to see if we can advance this to the full school committee, if there's enough support for that. Given two suggestions to this policy. One is Jesse's suggestion to standardize the language around the categories and sequence of forms of bias and bigotry. So given that, and I think for the second suggestion you made, Jesse, I agree with you that we should make a stronger commitment in this policy to what exactly we would like to see reported. But I would like to see that not hold up advancing this policy to the full school committee. I think we could still request that language and have that be a part of a larger discussion with the school committee, either in an appendix form or an additional language. That's my position. I'm ready to vote to advance this.
I thought we were going to go through this. I mean, I have a lot of comments.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you all have a lot of comments?
Well, before Carolyn gets to her next comment, let me just, tell you my final feeling, I guess, about section 12. I think it's too thin. I think that it would be at least helpful before we take it to the full committee to see some examples of what good standardized annual reporting looks like, so that there's no confusion about what the superintendent and the school committee would see each year. Just so that we know. I mean, it's not, I mean, it's like that we haven't seen the forms yet either, right? So I don't know what all those 4 newer forms look like that were looked at because they weren't in the packet. So maybe I'd look at those forms and say, oh, there's like, I don't know, 9 variables you fill in. One I can't use in my annual report because it has to do with a school. I don't want to identify by school. So I'll leave that out, but the other 8, those should be the variables that I just get in a spreadsheet, right? Or something like that, with the additions of the dates of things happening. Like, for example, Becky, if the district is chronically delayed in responding by weeks or months or longer, why shouldn't we know about that? I mean, it'll become public information. Okay. And if there's certain kind of discrimination in the school district, why shouldn't we know about it? Because it's not okay. So I understand completely, I mean, 150% with you about the privacy side of it, but I'm completely, in opposition to watering it down and removing data until it's not useful. And so I would love to see the forms that are going to be there so we can identify what the input data look like. And then from you or someone else in, at your level who have been through this and know what the other dates and endpoints are, policy was violated, policy was not violated, restorative justice was used, and that was the end of it, or something like that. That would be very helpful to see, so we have some idea what section 12 is going to generate. I sort of, Steve, don't want to see like, after, if this goes through the school committee, in a month or something, or one of our next meetings, you know what I mean? And then comes this August, and then we're looking for a report, we don't get it, and then there's like all this confusion about what's going to be reported. I'd rather that we have this chance to get this policy right, that we have the formatting and the requirements either available in bulleted form, or as Becky mentioned, maybe a example of a standardized report.
So I did just share the document with Steve, and you're certainly free to share it with anyone else on the policy subcommittee or otherwise, that I had created for a template for the reports.
Thank you.
And you're, I think the concerns that are being raised are very legitimate, and you get to ask for as detailed information as you would like. And then, some consideration, depending on how many incidents were in a given school or in a given year in a certain category, there'll need to be some opportunity to redact in terms of privacy, but asking for the maximum while having that constraint is a very legitimate and meaningful request.
Can I ask, so Jesse, your main concern is section 12. Do you
Yes.
have other substantive concerns with the policy as is?
I do not.
Andy, do you?
No, I would continue to suggest changing that one word "will" to "may" in order to make the intent clear of the bulleted list.
Okay, I suggest we do that. Carolyn, do you have substantive changes that you want to recommend throughout the policy? Or are they?
I do, to the
You do.
extent that, and I appreciate that we've had the opportunity to have some dialogue about this in a general sense, and I recognize that you probably want to move along. Mr. Mason is patiently waiting and probably developing his AI for for scheduling. I mean, perhaps we can just move this, hold this again and bring it back again for a more detailed go through now that we've had an opportunity for some general discussion. I understand you probably want to move on.
If that's where we are, then that's where we are. It's my preference to see if we can advance it pending, to advance it with the knowledge that we will continue to work on section 12 and bring that to the full school committee. Because I think it's in a good place and we're ready to consider it at that level.
I
But
disagree.
I know you disagree, Carolyn.
Yeah.
I'm just stating where I'm at.
Why do you want to move it out of subcommittee prematurely?
I guess I think because section 12 to me seems a technical exercise where we identify the categories that we want to see reported. And I trust Becky's expertise to deliver that rather than the substantive revision. This is my view. I recognize it's not your view, Carolyn. And I say that respectfully, really. That I don't see substantive changes being necessary to sections of the policy. So I'm eager now to see what the rest of the school committee sees. Now that I see that 3 of us don't see that there are substantive changes needed and 1 of us does.
I have questions. I have, I don't even know that it's substantive revisions, but I have questions and we need to move on to the next section of the meeting. So why try to move it forward rather than just come back to it at the next meeting? I think it
For the reason I
requires more
said,
discussion.
for the reason I said, but if the votes aren't there, then I accept that.
I'd like to move that this be brought to the school committee for a first reading. My understanding of a first reading at school committee is not that the subcommittee is advocating that the policy be adopted in just this form, but that there's been enough discussion that it's worth hearing views from the entire committee before taking it back to subcommittee.
So
Steve-
I strongly disagree because we haven't even discussed this. We discussed in email that we were going to go through this. I have redlined the document. I have comments. I have questions. I'm a member of the subcommittee and we haven't discussed the words on the page. So why move it forward?
I second the motion.
So Steve, can I just add, just as an addendum, it does need to pending, section 12, but it also does need to go to the BEU so that it needs to do that before it can go. So I know you were saying it just needs to be added as a pending as well.
Does it need to go to the BEU before a first reading at school committee or simply as part of the process leading to eventual adoption or not?
I think that depends on, again, sort of the process here in terms of how policies are generally moved, which I don't know. So whether it should go there first before or whether it can be parallel, I think that's something, I don't know how policies, what the process here is in terms of policies, when it impacts the BU and where there's potential, which they would see in this a potential for impact bargaining.
Can I just add something, Stephen, or
Go ahead, please.
that's something you wanted to?
Please,
I
Jessica.
didn't want to interrupt you. I was saying, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay. I guess my thought here is that I really hear what Carolyn is saying, and if I could just say it in my own words, Carolyn, a little differently, is that the purpose of our subcommittees, at least as I understand them, should be to offer us an opportunity to robustly analyze, query, discuss, and resolve questions and concerns we have before they get to the full school committee. And it's frustrating to me to have this beautiful new policy that got written, and I read every word of it, word to word, as soon as it came out in the email, and had some, some questions came to me as well. And I feel frustrated that like we only have one policy subcommittee meeting so far where it was docketed to review. But if we don't finish, if we only end up with, we don't meet like in groups of 2 off camera to go over all the details. If we had and it all was worked out and everyone was happy, we'd be past this and onto the cameras already. But in the absence of that kind of process, I feel where Carolyn's coming from, that if there are like substantive questions that still need to be asked or things that might spark other subcommittees members thinking about elements or objectives of this policy, we owe it to the full school committee and the more general expanded public who will be there in the room or watching to resolve these before they get to the full school committee.
My impression of the full school committee is that they're not going to take sitting down something that's passed on to them from the policy subcommittee. Even if we think we've resolved it, it'll get to the full school committee and get pounded again. It'll just have to come back to subcommittee anyway. So
Then why move
we
it
might as
forward?
well hear from people outside the subcommittee, before doing further work on this, is my view. Because Jesse, I know it would be nice if we could pound it into shape and then have the school committee pretty much accept that, but that's never been the way it's worked.
But we haven't
on the
even
school
done the
committee.
work
So
on the document.
We've had 2
I mean,
docketed
Stephen, this is so
discussions on this
simple. Just
policy.
don't move it forward. I don't know why you're trying to push this.
So we've had 2 docketed meetings on this policy so far. To me, the purpose of this is to review it in the subcommittee for substantive considerations. If we have wordsmithing to do, we can do it, but we can also do it via submitted comments at the full subcommittee, where one person inputs those and brings it for a first or second or third read, or back at the policy subcommittee if it's returned to the policy subcommittee, if there's serious substantive considerations brought by the school committee. To me, this is taking the temperature of the policy subcommittee on whether this policy is strong enough for the consideration of the full school committee in its current state. That's my view. Otherwise, it'll be interminable.
The point of this meeting was to go over this policy. We haven't even gone through the policy. We talked in email that we were going to go through this. Now it's 6
We've had 2
o'clock.
meetings on this policy, Carol.
But we discussed that we were there was an
But you
agreement.
had the opportunity in 2 meetings to go through this. No, you cannot, because we have to move on. You had 2 opportunities, and you said broad things about the entire policy, and you did not bring up specifics. You've had 2 opportunities, and we're going to move on now. We have a vote on the table.
Because we haven't gotten there yet.
Enough.
No, do not speak to me like that, Stephen.
Jesse, how do you vote?
Don't enough me. Are you
How do you
kidding?
vote, Jesse?
We have not had an opportunity.
This conversation is over. Jesse, how do you vote?
I object to your behavior, Stephen. It's insulting.
It is noted, Carolyn. How do you vote, Jesse?
Can we?
The motion on the table is, do we advance this to the full school committee or not?
Do we need to have it seconded?
It was seconded by me.
Oh, okay. I would vote no.
Okay. Andy, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Carolyn, how do you vote?
No.
I vote yes. It does not carry. We move on to the next item on the agenda. Hal, will you please come online?
So this is now the copy of the camera draft that's in the agenda, is that it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Let me pull it up. Thank you.
Hal, thank you for drafting this.
Sure. You're welcome.
Would you like to review it with us? Welcome back from Florida.
You? Yeah, you want me to pull it up on screen or to somebody else pull it up?
I think you could just talk. I could pull it up.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, you why don't, yeah, I'm not in. I'm just looking at it.
So as you remember, we were at Finance Sub and talked about this, and they, before
Can you see it?
approving
Not yet. It's showing your started, there it is. Thank you.
Yes.
and before Finance Sub said, fine, we'll submit it, but first you have to have we need a policy in place to do that. So I came up with some in collaboration with Steve and a few others to draft this policy, much of it taken from other districts nearby. So ours is different than most of the districts nearby because we're only talking about outdoor cameras. We're not talking about any cameras inside of buildings. This only refers to outside cameras. Gives a brief statement of what the purposes of this are, which is self-evident, I would think, and then comes to some of the specifics about where they can be, that they don't record audio, that facial recognition is not part of this, because that specifically is banned by town meeting. That only authorized personnel can access the logs, can access the footage, that is. Police obviously can get it if they comply with agreements between the town and the BPD, and that it will not be a system that is continuously monitored, but only something that's there for review. Monitor would wind up in somewhere in my suite. We'll keep the video for 30 days. Nothing will be released unless there's a legal process compelling the release of a recording. We only review things in response to incidents involving violations of law, with the one caveat that in an active situation with a clear and present danger, the system could be monitored to provide information real time, and that there'll be an access log kept for the recordings.
Jesse, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, two questions, Hal. One was, why is it that in the implementation and monitoring in the first bullet that we have a separate sentence about what'll happen at the high school?
Just because there was some area about exactly what is school property, so we want to make clear.
Oh,
Again, the purpose of this is that we have this expanded campus, and it really is the high school campus, which walks on a public street back and forth between 22 and 115. Hundreds, if not 1,000 kids at a given time on that street. So it becomes the campus for 7 minutes, 5 times a day when kids are walking there, and so it
I
just
guess, yeah, I understand that. My question is there not another case in the 8K-8 schools of an entrance of the school along a sidewalk where it's the same situation with outdoor cameras? Why is it different? And that includes the sidewalks surrounding the campus. I would imagine that at Lawrence School, the outside of it, the entrance may be right on a sidewalk on a regular street, and outdoor cameras would be picking up the sidewalk there. No reasonable expectation of privacy, just like people have cameras outside their houses, right? So I'm just wondering whether there are, or the entrance of Driscoll, the main entrance on Washington Street. So I'm just saying it seems when I read through it, that jumped out at me, like why we're putting the height. It's okay, but I'm just saying all the schools, it'll include sidewalks surrounding. It's different within, I guess.
yeah, it's
within
really
is off.
It's really to cover the case of the definition of that sidewalk on Tappan Street, as
Yeah.
opposed to just the entry. Obviously, the entrance sidewalk, obviously the sidewalk in front of Lawrence would be covered if you had outdoor cameras. That would be the point of having cameras.
But Greeno also, right? Because the front of the building, the front of the Schlunz Gymnasium, that's Greeno Street. So if there were cameras out there, it's a public sidewalk. So I'm just saying that I'm not quite sure if it's required, but I get what you were getting at, but I didn't know why we were specifying it to that amount, because the first sentence to me catches the whole thing. Cameras only placed in outdoor areas of school property, meaning on a school building, not like in the public, in terms of the camera installation where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. I don't know. I'm just, it just sort of to me read like almost a little high school centric suddenly that we have that sentence in there, and this is a camera policy for all 9 schools. So
Yeah, I mean, I imagine we could clarify that sentence to say in cases where, the normal travel of students within the day requires them to enter the public way, that those areas could also be covered.
Yeah, I like that.
Good.
Thank you. That'd
Everybody
be,
write
yeah.
that down because I'm usually one take on these things.
All right, maybe Stephen got it. Okay. And then the second thing was you mentioned at one time in the second bullet on storage and access, and this is the only other comment I had. This
Yes.
whole thing read great, by the way. The second bullet said video recordings will be stored for up to 30 days unless needed for investigations. But then when you spoke about it in oral right now, it said you'll store them for 30 days. So was it for up to or for 30 days? Because up to seemed to me to be, well, I decided this time to only store it for a week because I was running out of storage.
I think we should scratch that. It should say 30 days.
Okay, thank you, Stephen.
Thanks,
So
Jesse.
those,
Andy,
thanks.
Andy, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Hi, Hal. Thanks for joining us and for preparing this. Yeah, I wanted to ask about sort of how broadly you're planning to interpret sort of where you say that this will be used to, sorry, I'm missing the actual language, but in response to specific incidents involving suspected violations of law or school policy. So violations of school policy could be fairly broad, like if somebody's skipping class, right? That could be a violation of, say, an attendance policy. Is the intent to be sort of possibly reviewing footage in order to catch people skipping class, or, if like sort of relatively low level violations, right? Nowhere near violating the law, not posing a danger to anybody, but nonetheless a violation of policy.
No, if we need to clarify that, we can, but certainly not. We're talking about a kid that's on suspension, for example, and comes onto campus, and we see that he's there on campus or she's there on campus. We're talking about vandalism. We're talking about a crime that's committed or an assault that's committed on the sidewalks around the school, or somebody approaches, a kid or an adult approaches someone and says something, then we'll be able to look back and see and get some more details about what has happened.
I think if that's the intent, then we might want to formulate it differently, just so that it's not open to an overly broad interpretation of what's a violation of school policy.
That's just that clause there, violations of school policy, just to tighten that up a little bit, or to make that less broad.
That would make me more comfortable. I don't know how the other members feel about that.
How might you phrase it, Andy?
I'm not sure I can come up with the right phrasing right away. I just first wanted to make sure I understood the intent here.
Yeah. Incidents that threaten the health, welfare, and safety of the students or members of the BHS campus.
Yeah, something along those lines I think might be.
That would exclude cutting class. We have no intention of using it to catch kids cutting class.
Yeah.
Or kid who's vaping. We're not going to use that to track.
That's another great example. Like,
yeah,
I'm sure it's a violation of policy, but are we going to be reviewing footage to
track down kids who are vaping?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. That's all I had.
I had one question, which was under implementation and monitoring, Hal, what are the agreements that we have with the police for their access to footage? This is the second to last bullet.
Don't know the answer to that question.
So this just says
We've never had cameras at the high school, so I don't know. I've never had anybody come in and ask to see a camera or subpoena a camera because we don't have them at the high school.
I guess that's my question, is that are we giving police access after they subpoena them, or do we have separate agreements with police? And you're saying you don't know.
I don't know the answer
You're
to
just
that.
saying that this is governed by whatever the district and town agreements are.
Correct.
Okay. Carolyn, do you have any questions or thoughts on this one?
No, not at all.
Okay. Al, thanks for this work.
Yep, you're welcome.
So 2 suggestions on this one. One was Andy's I will just to get the committee's reaction to this. Anyone have any responses to Andy's suggestion? I like it a lot to make sure that there's no overreach enabled by that clause, just to make sure it's obvious that it's about something more severe than the examples you provided. And then the other one was Jesse's suggestion, which I also agree with.
There were two. One is the 30-day thing, and the other one was the sentence about the high school.
I was just thinking about the high school. I forgot about the 30-day thing. So I agree with both of those.
Okay. Yeah, so if we can fix those, I'm good with this.
That was easy.
Were you writing down changes, Stephen?
Yeah, I just wrote down
Oh,
the second
okay.
one though.
Great.
But so I can just make those changes, or Hal, if you want to make the change to Andy's proposal, and I can make those other two changes, or if you want to make all three changes, whatever you'd like.
Sure, I'll make them. I'll send them back to you tomorrow.
Okay.
I would,
To
yeah.
advance this,
would
then?
we, what's that?
Do we want to go ahead and propose advancing this to the full school committee?
Yeah, I was gonna move that we advance it.
All right. Anyone want to second it?
I'll second.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Andy. You can have
Oh,
it.
sorry, I didn't hear or see you.
Andy, how do you vote?
Difference?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes,
And I vote yes as well.
of course,
Thank
with
you.
the three changes, right? With
Yes,
the three-
pending those three changes. Thank
Yep.
you, Hal. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Hal.
Let's move on to new business. Does anyone have new business to propose?
No.
Stop sharing. I just have
Oh, I
one.
guess I do have one.
Go ahead, Jesse.
Personal electronic devices.
That was mine.
You wanted to, that's funny because we didn't tell, in case for you watching at home, we did not prepare that in advance. So the reason I mentioned that is because over last summer, the schools put one together, put each theirs together. I think it got socialized. Well, anyway, why don't you talk about it? It got socialized. There's, I'm questioning where are we now in terms of
Right.
being able to bring something in front of the school committee before the end of this school year, because it's been sitting with us since last fall.
Right. So to review, it's come before the full school committee once. It was paused because we've learned that the AG's office is considering its own PED policy, which would hold all schools to a higher standard than what we had proposed.
Right.
I want to propose going forward with our policy because it's not clear to me what timeline the AG's policy would move forward with. It could be a week, it could be 2 years, it could be changed. Just to be specific, they're proposing a bell-to-bell policy, which is the strictest of the 4 standards that we had seen in the AG's sample standards. We're proposing moving on. So I suggest we have a second read at the full school committee and not take it back to the policy subcommittee. I don't know how this goes though. Andy, do we just
Remind me, does a second read involve a vote to pass it, or does it have to come back for a third reading?
I think we could vote to pass it at this point. The only thing that was under consideration is whether we kept or removed the consequences section. And it seems like we will keep the consequences section because only one principal had offered concerns about it, and they were very light concerns. They weren't very strong.
So it'll come up in exactly the same form that it came up
Yes.
earlier.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I was going to ask that too, Andy, that basically it seems like no changes have been made since the last
Right.
time we saw it in the school.
Right.
Okay. So if it can be, if then it can happen really fast, then maybe we can put it into like this week's meeting.
That would be terrific.
Okay. If we're not anticipating any back and forth on it, because it is going to be, I think, a long meeting to start with. So.
Okay.
If the AG's office, has something by the end of the summer or something, and this was already in policy, we just have to actually modify it through the future policy subcommittee to align, or would the state's requirements sort of just automatically overwhelm what we have? If the state
I think we would then have to draft a policy to bring us into compliance.
would have to draft, yeah, exactly. Okay, fine. Okay, I get it. Thank
But
you.
this at least assures us that we'll start the next school year with at least
Yeah,
this guidance.
right.
Yeah.
Okay. So if that's the case, then let's plan to docket it this week and
That's
just
great.
wrap it up.
And Carolyn, I'm sorry for speaking rudely to you before. I apologize for that.
Thank you.
Are there any other new business items? Then this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah.